Chapter 10 Raiders of the Seven Dwarves. A desert. There's a desert just outside the king's palace. Wolsey raised his sunglasses and looked slowly from one horizon to the other. He was standing astride a line. On one side of the line there were verdant fields, cottages, and fluffy grazing sheep. On the other side there was a rolling golden desert, oases, and tethered camels calmly chewing. The corner of the palace that intruded into the desert had developed a minaret in sympathy. Why don't I ever notice things like this? Bernice patted him on the shoulder and took out the map that the vizier had given her. Life is but a dream, Wolves. Or this one is, at least. Beside them stood the seven dwarves, in desert kit, with oversized packs and Arab headscarves. Candy, on the other hand, had brought a parasol, and was entirely white with sunblock. The horse was still a horse. Sort of. Now, do we go that way, towards the oasis? She pointed at a clearly defined landmark on the horizon. Or that way, towards that one? She swung her finger to a more distant oasis, its image flickering in the heat haze. The second one, Candy offered, putting a hand up to shade her eyes. I've always preferred Blur to Oasis. They all turned to look at her. A tumbleweed rolled lazily across the desert sands. So, said Bernice finally, let's get going, shall we? The map took them into the heart of what it called the Empty Quarter. Then into a quarter of that was known only as the Empty 16th. In the very centre of this dusty wilderness lay a cluster of sand-blasted shrubs, clinging to a gash in the ground, a pothole eroded over ages, half concealed by the ever-shifting whispering sands. Beside this monolith to the vastness of existence and the passage of time stood the Spice Girls. They were carrying huge jars, from which they offered the party their exotic spices. "Look at the size of those jugs!" gasped Laddish, until Liberal slapped him. "No, thank you, dears." Wolsey waved the scantily clad maidens away. "Thanks for appearing. That'll help the box office a bit." Bernice looked at him as the girls wandered off into the sandstorms, throwing their urns aside with petulant gestures. "You're becoming quite cynical, aren't you?" "My life," Wolsey looked at her seriously, "has been revealed to be a pantomime. How seriously am I supposed to take it?" "You had a good life, as you know, as you were before. And I'm sure you kept my litter tray fresh and maintained a supply of wool mice." Wolsey suddenly waved aside her protest. "It doesn't matter. Let's see what's down this hole." Bernice bit her lip for a moment, then could only follow his lead as he turned and slid down into the lip of the cave. There was really nothing she could say. The dwarves and Candy followed them down, their careful feet finding ledges and holds in the sand, while Bernice fell several times, supported only by the weight of Candy beside her. The overhanging cave mouth became a long, dark tunnel, dripping with condensation, and the temperature soared. Bernice was grateful that she'd elected to stay with the short green jerkin, but the tights were starting to be a problem. Still, she wasn't likely to get an opportunity to change down here. She was trying to remember the exact plot of the pantomime Aladdin. She'd seen a couple of animated versions when she was a child, but they had differed from each other on vital details. It was probably fortunate that they were trapped in such a flexible genre. If this world had been based on Shakespeare's sonnets, for example, there'd have been theeing and thusing forever, without any legroom at all. Wolsey forged ahead of the party. He turned around. "It's getting dark in here." "That's all right," Candy called, fishing in her pockets. "I'm carrying a torch." "No surprises there," muttered Bitchy. The dame pulled a thick piece of wood from her voluminous dress and slapped it in the palm of her hand. Wait a moment. Ah, there. She flicked a piece of bark from one position to another, and the torch burst into flame. The party carried on down the tunnel. Bernice was certain that Wolsey was trying to ignore her, until he slowed down slightly and murmured to her, "Bernice, I'm new at seeing this strange world of mine from the outside, as you do. But doesn't it occur to you that this is somehow a strange experience?" "Strange? In what way?" "Not sure. I thought you would know. Forget it." He moved on. Bernice was considering his words when he stopped suddenly. "Oh my," he purred. "I think you'd better all come and have a look at this." The others pushed forward. They'd come to the edge of a large cavern. A narrow pathway led across it to a door on the far side. On all sides of the cavern, however, were strewn piles of glittering jewels, gems, and valuable baubles of all kinds. There were many fortunes of them, lying in heaps apparently discarded, glittering in the flickering light of the torch. "Bagsy the Tiara," said Bitchy, diving forward. "Stop!" Bernice caught the dwarf by her collar and pulled her back into the group. "So, this little lot has been sitting around, unguarded, at the end of a short tunnel for a very long time, without anybody ever taking it?" "Stranger things have happened," said Lazy, shrugging. "Like that business with the transvestite wolf." "He was a cross-dressing wolf who was only expressing himself as a predator," muttered Liberal. "It wasn't your granny that he ate," huffed Laddish. "Okay, so it wasn't mine either, but—" "Quiet!" snapped Bernice. "The long and the short of it," she caught Moody's eye, "I mean, the point of it, is we cross the bridge without touching any of the easily accessible riches. Agreed?" They all mumbled terse agreement. Wolsey stepped aside, and Bernice led them across. Surprisingly, they made it to the other side. A short stretch of darker corridor followed, and then they found themselves suddenly outside? No, Bernice realized they weren't outside. They were in an area where ruddy storm clouds appeared to sweep overhead, purple ones below billowing about their feet. Firestorms and streaks of lightning split the air with fearsome flashes. The effect was quite disorientating, and Wolsey instinctively fell onto all fours. Bernice half expected him to vanish into the clouds around their feet, but thankfully he found support. He was standing on a series of piled stones, arranged like stepping stones across a river. Bernice glanced over her shoulder. The others were bravely standing at the entrance, waiting to see what happened to the two of them. "It's all right," she called. "These are just illusions, designed to scare us away or make us fall. Keep to the stone pathway and you'll be fine." Through the clouds ahead, she could just about glimpse an archway in the far wall. "Illusions, eh?" Wolsey murmured. He pulled up an object from beneath the clouds, something he'd obviously found on the walkway, and pointed it at Bernice. "So, what's this? And where did it come from?" Bernice raised her hands. "Wolsey, that is what we call a dirty great gun. Please don't press or squeeze anything." Wolsey turned it away from her, gazing at it, an intense expression on his face. "It speaks to me of my former life." Bernice relaxed. "Well, it is one of those objects that we have in the outside world, and you don't have here. Thank goodness. There must be something genuinely magical about these special effects." She clicked her fingers a few times, putting a theory together. Magic equals a door between the worlds, between this place and where we come from. That's how the gun got here. She put her hands on her hips and inspected the room, a rueful expression on her face. Wolsey looked around the cave to his right, leaning his weight on his right front paw, holding the gun in his other hand. They stood like that for a moment. Then a great tremor rocked the cave. Wolsey dropped the gun, and it fell away into the infinite depths beneath the stones. "It doesn't want us to stay here too long," Bernice shouted, hopping from stone to stone almost as nimbly as Wolsey did. "Come on!" Behind them, screaming and shouting at each other to form a chain, came the dwarves and Candy. The horse came to the edge of the stone path, regarded it for a moment, then turned around and headed for the exit. Bernice counted all the dwarves in through the entrance into the next room. It was thankfully quite normal in appearance. It was full of urns, gilded boxes, and big square metal containers with locks. Bernice put a finger to Lavish's lips. "Yes, they are chests, and neither are they small. Let's leave it at that, shall we?" She turned back to the room. Sitting atop one of the urns, at the back of the room, illuminated by a shaft of glittering light, sat a rather dowdy and messy-looking old lamp. Bernice rubbed her fingers together, experiencing again that delicious feeling of discovery that had always accompanied her archaeological adventures. There remained a short stretch of rather too smooth, untroubled sand beneath her party and the nearest urn. The others were quiet. She realized that they were waiting for her word. She turned to Lavish. "You couldn't just go and get that lamp for me, could you?" She stopped him as he took a step forward. "No, joke. Give me a moment to think." She swung back and regarded the lamp. If only she could remember what it did in this particular panto, what its function in the plot was. It looked rather grotty to be a big and groovy MacGuffin object. She dropped into a crouch, pursed her lips, and gently blew at the sand. It swirled into ripples. She blew harder. There was a thunk of impact. A dart had landed, its shaft still vibrating vertically on the spot where the swirl had formed. She looked up at the dwarves. "When I say blow, blow like it's your 100th birthday." "Some of us are used to that, dear," murmured Candy, adjusting her hair. Bernice counted down from 10, and they all blew together. The sand swept aside, revealing a complicated mosaic on the floor. A hail of darts pelted down, turning the floor into a garden of hard, upright stalks. Bernice stood and carefully examined the pattern of where they'd fallen. "I think that's all of them," she whispered. "Oh well, here goes nothing. I do not want to find out what a funeral in this world would be like." And she hopped into the middle of the mosaic. Nothing happened. She let out a breath and grinned back at the dwarves. "Fine so far. Now, I'm assuming that all this jiggery-pokery on the floor actually just comes down to don't step on the white tiles. Second puzzle's usually a deceptively simple one." She met the worried eyes of the dwarves. "See? You're getting that archaeology field trip after all." She suddenly realized that their mouths were open in terror. Her body picked a direction and hopped in it. The swinging blade swept across the room where she'd been standing, the flat of it smoothing the sleeve on her forearm as it went. She raised a finger. "As I said, it all comes down to don't step on the black tiles. Now, what's the third problem? The law of threes in traps as well as in comedy is near universal." She took a series of quick little hops from white tile to white tile, making her way across the floor until she was standing against the bulk of the urn atop which the lamp sat. She thought for a moment, and then intuitively reached up and just touched the shabby-looking ornament. Nothing happened. She took off her belt and made it into a loop, then glanced back over her shoulder at her transformed students. She'd rather wanted to get into a situation like this with them, if truth be told, but she'd imagined that it would be on the sands of Perfecton, rather than amongst the sounds of some sort of bargain basement Arabia. "I'd like my epitaph to be back in a mo," she told them, and winked. Then she flipped the belt up onto the top of the urn, lassoed the lamp with it, and hooked it off into her hands. She paused for a moment, looked around, shrugged, and then hopped happily back to the others. "Maybe the law of threes doesn't always hold true," she told them, re-looping her belt and hanging the lamp from it. Laddish had spotted a pair of large gilded nesting birds painted on one of the urns. He pointed at them. "Look at the size of those." "Quiet," snapped Wolsey. "I can hear something very faint, but it's coming closer." Bernice looked uneasily at him. "It wouldn't be a sort of rumble, would it?" "Well, more a sort of, only I've just noticed those." She pointed at two broad channels, one of which ran down either side of the room. "And I've been struck by a sudden and rather frightening mental image. Those urns remind me of something." "Yes, it is a rumble," Wolsey nodded. "Definitely a rumble." Bernice shooed the dwarves and Candy back the way they'd come. "Then I think we'd better—" The smooth, perfectly polished boulder smashed right through the urns, knocking them spinning to the left and right. The dwarves yelled and ran for their lives, leaving Bernice and Wolsey to grab the gawping Candy and, in one movement, throw her through the door. The party dashed across the strange, storm-filled room as lightning cracked around them, the boulder inexplicably bouncing from one pile of stones to the next, as the dwarves sprinted as fast as their little legs could carry them, the taller humanoids swiftly catching them up. The whole party thus sprawled neck and neck out onto the walkway, which ran across the room full of jewels. The boulder was going to fit neatly through both doors, Bernice realised with horror, and run right up the tunnel after them. They got to their feet and rushed across the walkway as fast as they could go, and had just about got to the other side when, out of the corner of her eye, Bernice saw something very scary. She saw Bitchy reach out a hand from the yelling party of careering dwarves and snatch a tiara from the piles of valuables as they fled past. Which was probably why that huge metal door immediately fell across the entrance, blocking their way. They slammed against it, panting. Then as one they spun round. "You absolute!" Bernice began, snatching the tiara away from Bitchy and tossing it back into the pile. "It's just what you did yourself with the lamp," the dark-haired dwarf complained. "When I do it, it's archaeology. When you do it, it's shoplifting. That's the rule." Bernice looked up and sucked in a terrified breath. "Oh, my goddess." The boulder rushed through the far door and straight at them. Bernice closed her eyes and whispered, "Jason." Stokes, the other academics, and Thu had been tied to chairs in the enclosure, secured by the taut, thick wire that the Grell had fired from their date axes. Epstein had been trying to reason with the Grell Master for several hours, which was rather a trying process as, unlike the villains in holodramas that Stokes had seen, the Grell seemed entirely open to the idea of talking away with their captives and listening to their point of view. Not that they actually did anything merciful or generous as a result. They just liked to listen. "So, you see, we ought to join forces," Epstein concluded, looking up at the Grell Master hopefully. The Grell hooted amongst themselves. Then the Grell Master, the only one of them it seemed who could speak English, turned back to Epstein. "Information. Your reasoning is inaccurate, if informative. We must take all the information here, and it is incorrect to say that you must have the information also. We will take the information from you and from these machines, with your cooperation or by force." "But you're missing my point," sighed Epstein. "Enough words," the Grell Master concluded. At which point, Stokes realised that the Grell had something in common with those holodrama villains after all. Your philosophy is of no more interest. One for you, then, said Epstein, glancing at Otterbland, who made a face back. Oh, and you were doing so well, muttered Hetty consolingly. Thu, who was tied beside Stokes, had been staring at the Grell since they first appeared. They're different to you as well. At first I was afraid, and I was petrified, but now I'm enjoying myself. Whatever turns you on, Stokes muttered. Try not to tell them anything about your technology. Ooh! Thu looked disappointed. Why not? Stokes frowned. Well, because. The Grell Master approached the alien, carrying a piece of equipment in each of its tentacular hands. Conclusion: you are a native of this planet. We have tested the use of what you call the green for short-range travel. We do not, however, know what these are. We have found many. He opened his gelatinous palms. In one sat a gun, similar to the one that the Grell had taken from Stokes's jacket. In the other, a smaller device. It was a black box with a big green bulb on top of it that glowed. It was obviously a companion piece to the gun, and Stokes wondered, a little enviously, why he hadn't got one of those. These weapons are present at many places on the upper level, said the Grell. Places where weapons should not be stowed. The boxes are all concealed within green vases. We know the weapon disintegrates its target. Query: what is the nature of the box? Thu, to Stokes's horror, began to chuckle happily. Explain, snapped the Grell Master, swinging his datax so the beam weapon pointed straight into the alien's face. Thu didn't stop laughing. He just smiled a simple smile. The box and the gun, as you would call it, are both parts of one thing. The gun isn't a weapon, it's... what's the word? It's a... He found the word he was after and clicked his tongue triumphantly against his palate. A children's toy! Stokes and the Grell Master, despite themselves, exchanged a worried look. The boulder roared into the room. Bernice made herself open her eyes to look at it. She could see the details, the fine lines on its polished black surface, in a second. And then, with a crash, the walkway collapsed beneath it. And with another crash, the cavern floor collapsed too. And then the boulder was gone, down to the depths below, leaving only a big hole and a little gust of wind. The party of adventurers hesitantly stepped forward and ventured as far back along the walkway as they dared. Bernice lay flat on her stomach and crawled to the end, gazing down into the pitch dark of the pit into which the boulder had fallen. That floor must have been like balsa wood, muttered Moody. What sort of cave is this? A pantomime cave, whispered Bernice, grinning all over her face. A very badly made set. Which is odd, really, because... A sudden thought came to her. Wolves? What you were saying about this being an odd experience? Well, it's true, isn't it? She leapt to her feet, and as the end of the walkway creaked and bent towards the hole, nervously jumped back to where the others were standing. At that moment, from far below, there was a very distant, very tiny splash. Bernice gulped, but continued, her enthusiasm unabated. This has been a rather non-generic adventure, don't you think? Well, I mean, all right. It's got a genre, the genre of adventure and perilous exploration, which generally constitutes my life. But it's not really panto, is it? Wolsey and the others nodded slowly, trying to understand her words. Where are the men dressed as women and the other way round? Where are the stupid tricks and the audience interaction and the songs? No. Ever since we set foot in this cave, it's been deadly danger all the way. Odd, don't you think? The others all nodded again. Bernice slumped. Now, if only we knew what it meant. What do you reckon we should do with this lamp before we give it to the vizier? Cute tugged at her sleeve. "I'll give it a rub if you want. Clean it up a bit for him." Bernice wagged a finger at him. "Absolutely not. That's the first rule of archaeology. Don't go rubbing your artifacts. He'll probably want to clean it himself." "Oh well, come on then. If nobody has any suggestions, we'll just have to hand it to him and see what happens." Bernice headed for the tunnel and the others followed her, all except Woolsey, who stayed behind for a moment, an expression of intense concentration on his face. "I can't help but think," he whispered to himself, "that we're all missing something rather fundamental." He tried to understand just what was bothering him, but it wouldn't reveal itself. Finally, he just shrugged his shoulders and, still uneasy, followed his friends. Bernice was thinking frantically as her party made its way along the corridor. The lamp had a real significance in this particular pantomime, she was certain. But what was it? What did it do? She felt a tugging on her sleeve once again, and looked down to see Cute walking beside her, struggling to keep up. "I was afraid," he said, "when the blade swung down. I thought you were going to be killed. If you had been, I'd have been really sad." "Would you?" was all Bernice could say. "Why? How do you feel about me?" The small figure seemed to marshal all his courage. "Well, I love you." "Oh," was all Bernice could say. "I think you're wonderful," Cute continued. "I want to learn all I can from you and be like you. You're not like all the dwarf girls." Bernice winced. So this was what motivated her potential lover in the real world. She felt a great wave of sadness rise in her chest. Probably a reaction to the boulder, and that little image she'd had of Jason, of lying against him as if they were moulded into each other, his arms curled round her, secure and warm. She'd seen all that she'd thrown away, and had just wished for him to be there at the moment of her death. It didn't change how she felt about him, she thought. It was just a recognition that what he'd represented, real love, matching halves, wholeness and connection, it was still a dream she had. It wasn't really fair to judge Doran by what Cute did. All of the dwarves were extraordinarily exaggerated versions of just one particular trait of the real student's personality. But was this what love was going to be for her as she got older? Somebody who didn't know, but who wanted to. Somebody who just wanted to get inside and see. He didn't love her. He loved the world that she represented. He loved her learning and age and experience. Once he'd grown a little, he would leave her. She reached out and touched Cute's face gently. He looked at her with imploring eyes, because she knew the touch must instantly feel like a departing one. "Sometimes," she said, "life isn't a dream. Sometimes it's a bloody nightmare." Query. A toy. The artifact of most interest on this world is a toy? The Grell Master leant closer to Thu. Query. Is your mental functioning impaired? "Of course," laughed the alien. "I've been alone for centuries. You'd be crazy too. Actually, sorry," he giggled, "you'd be dead. But we, us, are a long-lived race, unfortunately." "About the toys," Stokes prompted him, not wanting to see how the Grell Master would react to this provocation. "I hope they're not valuable. I fired the gun at one of the vases. I suppose it might have contained one of those boxes." "You fired a gun at a vase?" Thu's head snapped round, as far as it could with him in his bonds, and he gazed at Stokes attentively. "I wonder if anybody's ever done that before. The green in the green. What a puzzle!" And he started to giggle maniacally again. "I'm afraid," Singh muttered to Warrender, "that I've encountered someone more annoying than you." "Oh," the rodent smiled. "Good." "Query!" screamed the Grell Master. "Query, query!" "I think, dear," said Lucinda to Thu, That in a very ungrammatical fashion. He's asking what you mean. Oh, ah. Thu made an effort to stop laughing. All so interesting. After all these years, hard to take anything seriously. Fine, I'll stop. He looked up at the Grell soberly, sniggered again, and then, taking a deep breath to steady himself, resumed his story. The gun and the box are used by children to send things into the green. The gun has a control on the end, so that the small adjustments in position can be made instantly. The box does the big, all-over-the-place control of greened object stuff. If a box was sent into the green and somebody found it there, woo! They could invade. We might all be in deadly danger. He looked around the group seriously. Then his face flopped and he shrugged. No, actually, probably not. But it'd be fun. What is this green? Asked Singh, despite Stokes's imploring look that he should restrain his intellectual curiosity in front of the Grell. Is it a higher dimension, or a sort of virtual reality? Virtual reality? Thu frowned. What's that? This is real reality, an area that accesses all the dimensions, a playground in time and space. The children send things into the green and stick them out into places and times where they want to put them, or manipulate their pets so they can enjoy the sensations of Dimension 9, the sky full of dreams, the sleeping feelings of suns, stuff like that. Silly, eh? Stokes frowned. The scientists amongst the party, and the Grell, and even some of the humanities staff, were staring at Thu, open-mouthed, awestruck. Sorry, he said, but what does that mean exactly? It was Farouk who broke the silence. Limitless, instantaneous information transfer across time and space, access to higher dimensions, all knowledge and power accessible at the flick of a switch. Yes, Thu mused. Not that you can use the green to travel anywhere. It stitches other times, places and dimensions to itself, and you can't take quick steps through, look around. But it's like a bad coat or a good injury. The stitches don't last. So you can see why I got bored. Our species can't leave home like all yours can. Lucky things. We got allergic to being without our technology, our plants, our civilization, centuries ago. It's a physical need. If we were to go into space, we would require taking this world here with us, all of it. I'm a bit like that, said Professor Wagstaff. I don't like to leave my study very often. And all the others of us, too. That's why I've been so lonely, because I thought I could be alone. I didn't go with the others when they left. They left, Stokes said. I thought you said that they couldn't go into space. They did not, replied Thu, showing his first sign of impatience. They went into the green. The first thing that Bernice's party noticed when they emerged from the cave was the horse. It ran up to them and nudged Bernice on the hip urgently. Are you after the lamp? She asked. Because I have to say, it's going to be difficult for you to use it. But not for me. Atop a high sand dune looking down at them stood the Vizier. He was rubbing his hands together in glee. Just toss it up to me, and I'll shower you with gold. Oh, go on. The horse once more nudged at Bernice's hip. She called up to the Vizier. We were just wondering, what do you want it for exactly? Well, what do you think I want it for? As an ornament. I've got a plinth put aside for it. It'll go right between the china cats and that picture of the crying boy. Wolsey put his hand on the horse's head. Is he telling the truth? To everybody's surprise, the horse nodded emphatically. So, what's the problem? Asked Bernice. The horse stood rigid for a moment, as if its occupants were desperately trying to think of a way to convey their information. Then it quickly nodded. It raised a front hoof and lifted it towards the Vizier. The Vizier, Benny followed. The horse shook its head. Is not the problem. The horse nodded. Then it turned, lolloped a few feet away, and then turned to look at her again. The problem's farther away, suggested Gushy. The horse nodded again. It reared up on its hind legs, which, frankly, astonished Bernice, and described a little circle. Then it rolled on its back, shook its legs in the air, stiffened, and fell over onto its side. Bernice and the others looked at each other, then back to the horse. Sorry, no idea. The horse leapt up again and looked all around itself frantically. It shivered and shook. I can see you're trying really hard, Bernice told it, but I'm afraid we're none the wiser. If it had made any sense, she would have glanced at her watch at this point. This was hardly the time for charades. The horse ripped itself in two. The dwarves cried out, and Candy screamed. An exploding horse, she whimpered. We're in an art movie. No wonder I'm confused. My eyesight's so bad I can't read the subtitles. That is so gross, whispered Bitchy, hiding her eyes. The man in the front part of the horse pulled his equine head off to more screams of disgust. Listen, he shouted. What we're trying to tell you is... Yes, the vizier called. What are you trying to tell us? I'm freezing up here. The toes of my slippers have gone all droopy. His grin hadn't faded, nor did it when a hand tapped him on the shoulder. Not now. He turned around and then turned back to Bernice's party. Then all the blood seemed to drain from his face, and a look of horror overtook him. He spun back round and raised his hands in shock. "Eh," he said. "I thought I was the villain in this story. Eh? Ooh." A hand shoved him, and he fell over backwards, rolling down the dune until he collided with Benny's ankles. He crawled swiftly round to hide behind them. Bernice and her party looked up at the edge of the dune. Over it, framed by the moon, stood a line of imposing figures, grell servitors spinning their axes. Behind them, sand dropping from his vast body as he raised himself from his hiding place, there was a giant. He eclipsed the moon as he stood to his full height. The man standing at the front of the horse costume slapped his forehead with his palm. "We're surrounded," he finished. "Information. You are completely surrounded." The call came from the other side of the little depression where the cave mouth stood. The party of adventurers spun round. Standing on that escarpment with their leader were a line of man-sized hissing rats dressed in rags. Beside them were the Grellmaster and, oddly, a woman in a rather fabulous black cocktail dress. "Operation Desert Spoon has been a complete success," the Grellmaster continued. "Desert Spoon," murmured Wolsey. "That's probably what they intend to do with our brains," Benny whispered to him. Moody pointed at the giant. "That's the ogre, the one who tried to frame us." The Grellmaster made a gargling sound, the Grell version of laughter. "He is now employed as our stealth giant." "And that's the Wicked Queen," gasped Gushy. "And the Rat King." Wolsey drew his sword and snarled, the fur along his spine rising into a vicious plume. "I swear, Bernice, if this comes to a battle, I shall have his gizzard for my supper." "Save a piece for me." Moody pulled his short sword, and the other dwarves followed suit. The giant took a step forward, his shadow falling across them. "We could go back down the cave," whispered Cute. "No," said Bernice. "There's that hole, remember? We'd be trapped." She grabbed the vizier by the collar and hauled him to his feet. "Have you got any magic that might help?" "Well, if I'd known I was going to be attacked by a giant, I'd have brought my potions, wouldn't I? Besides," he glanced scathingly up at the Wicked Queen, "she'd keep me busy while the others—" He drew a line with his finger across his throat. Bernice turned to the Grellmaster. "What do you want with us exactly?" "Your brains, your knowledge of what this world is. But most of all," he stuck out a squiddy finger, "we want that." Bernice's hand went to her belt. "You want the lamp? Why?" "It glows with power. It radiates energy. Information. My retinal sensors report it to be the most powerful artifact we've encountered since arriving wherever we are." Bernice took the lamp from her belt and squinted at it. It didn't look like it was glowing to her. Neither did it look powerful. The man from the front of the horse waddled closer to Bernice and whispered sidelong to her. Just don't let him rub it. I remember this story if nobody else does. Rub it? Candy inquired loudly. Why should he want to rub it? She glanced up at the suddenly interested Grell and then back to Bernice's stormy expression. Oh dear, sorry I spoke. A line shot out from one of the Grell's axes and wrapped itself around the handle of the lamp. Before Bernice could tug back or even react, it had flown off. It landed in the hands of the Grell master. He gurgled in triumph. Bernice put her hands on her hips and looked down at her boots. I'm just having one of those genres, she muttered. From the informative record of recent Grell history, the newly elected and so far rather successful Grell master could not resist a gurgle of delight as he thrust the glowing lamp skywards in his hands. Information! The lamp is mine. Mine, he shouted, regarding himself, of course, as a representative of the mighty Grellor. Watching the reactions of the cluster of humanoids gathered below, he lowered the lamp again and paused before placing his fingers against the shining but burnished metal of the ornament. Information. They do not wish me to rub this lamp. Conclusion. I will do that. Ignoring the cries and implorings of those he had conquered, he began to rub some of the must of centuries from the lamp. After a moment, the lamp began to tingle with power. The colour of the glow changed from gold to a verdant green. Then, with a thump, the lid of the lamp burst skywards, and a plume of green smoke whooshed upwards. The smoke coalesced in the air, thickening and gaining structure, until above the Grell stood another giant. This one was blue, with a bare chest covered in white fur, as was its head. It had 6 multi-jointed fingers on each hand. It had blazing green eyes and a mouth full of sharp teeth, a mouth which was opened in a roar. It had no legs. Its torso faded into a wisp of gas. It lowered its head and looked down at the Grell master. The Grell master turned to his servitors and hooted with excitement. Information. With the aid of this being, we will conquer this world. Note. The particular narrative ends here. Obviously, the original Grell editor thought that, from his species' point of view, this was the best possible ending. Extract ends. The vast genie's eyes glowed a brighter shade of green. Woolsey put a hand on Bernice's shoulder. Come on, we can't stand against that. Bernice shook her head, staring at the creature that floated above the Grell master. It's a perfecton, like the ones I saw in the audience. Nevertheless, the cat began. But then he spun his head at the sound of an explosion. A beam of green fire had flashed out from the genie's eyes, incinerating a row of the Rat King's subjects. The Grell master froze, still in the posture of a gloating conqueror. Query, he began haltingly, is this being not on our side? The perfecton genie threw its head back and roared like a dinosaur. The wicked queen raised her arms in an attacking posture, red light sparkling around her fingers, and the genie swung its hand like a mace, sending her flying high into the air, off into the distance. The Grell were running away from the monster now, as Bernice continued to watch, unable to take her eyes off the slaughter. 1 or 2 of the aliens turned to fire at the genie, but the energy bolts went straight through it, doing no visible harm. The Rat King vanished, stamped into the soil by a boot that suddenly formed out of the smoke of the genie's lower body. Giant, called the Grell master, engage this being in combat. Rather bravely, Bernice thought, the giant actually did so. He stepped forward, his hands outstretched in a wrestling posture, and grabbed the genie by the shoulders. The genie grabbed the giant back, flexing its muscular arms around his back, and the two figures twisted this way and that, tottering around the landscape, their roars and footfalls making the ground vibrate. "That's not something you see every day, is it?" the vizier grinned nervously. The man from the horse glanced at his fellow equine impersonator, and with one movement they ducked back into their costume. "Bernice, we must go," muttered Wolsey, his hand now clamped on her shoulder. "What if they fall? Come now, or I shall pick you up and carry you." "Where is there to go?" Bernice took his hand. "If we try to run—" She broke off as the genie looked up, aware that, while he fought the giant, others were getting away. The beam flashed from his eyes again. The running grell blazed into gas. The grell master caught up in the act of turning his weapon back towards the creature. "See?" She glanced around her group quickly. "We need a way out of here that won't bring us to the attention of that thing." "Eh? Say no more." The vizier closed his eyes and held out his hands. "Form a circle and take my hands while I concentrate on my conjugations." "I've heard that before," muttered Candy, as the group formed a circle. The horse raised one hoof, then another, then finally settled for standing in the middle of the others. Bernice looked over her shoulder as the vizier started to mutter under his breath. Behind her, the genie had managed to destroy all other opposition and had turned all of its attention back to the giant, whom it was trying to overpower through sheer grappling strength. She looked down at Cute, who was holding her hand and gazing up at her, a certain and brave expression on his face. He was, she realized with a sigh, convinced that she was going to save them all. With a sudden roar, the genie pushed the giant from its clutches. It grabbed him again before the large humanoid could react and swung him with limitless strength above its head. It began to spin the vast mass around and around, faster and faster. The vizier opened his eyes for a moment, faltered over his words, and then closed them again. With a cry of triumph, the genie let the giant go. He flew into the air. His shadow swept over Bernice and her friends. He hung in the air above them. Cute gulped. "Vizier!" Bernice shouted. "Now!" A puff of smoke engulfed the group and was snuffed out as the giant body slammed into the sand.